As a web designer or developer, your personal website is the absolute best place to experiment and learn new things. Hello and welcome. Today we're going to work a little bit on my personal website. So initially when I created my personal website, it was quite a quick project. So all the case studies in my work section are actually just MDX files inside a data folder in the project. I'm using an open source tool called Content Layer, which gives you a little bit of type safety in that they parse your MDX for you, check if your frontmatter fields pass the configuration that you pass them, and then they give you access to a function where you can get the data from all the MDX files that they parsed. Now, Content Layer is great, especially for me when I can just go into the repo, create a new MDX file, write my case study, and then push it up to GitHub. It works absolutely fine. But since then, I've found a much greater solution to storing data in your local file system or in a GitHub repository, as well as editing that content without having to know how to code or create a terminal instance and push things to GitHub. Keystatic is a fantastic project, also open source, and they make editing content inside your code base extremely simple. So in our previous method of using Content Layer, the editing experience is still cumbersome because I still have to create an MDX file in the correct directory and then follow the right format of frontmatter fields and then write my case study in MDX. Rather than that, Keystatic gives you a complete CMS and a complete rich text editing experience right out of the box. You just have to download a couple of NPM packages and then they store that data in your local file system, or you can also connect to a GitHub repository. So far I've used Keystatic for quite a few client projects. As you can see, this is the entire setup of the website that I just hand over to the client and they can go in and just change all kinds of details like the headings, the descriptions, the images and everything. So let's start setting this up. So I have my project open in VS Code and we have the docs open at keystatic.com. So I'm going to go into the Next.js integration setup and then start by installing the packages. Once the package is installed, we need to create a Keystatic config inside our root directory. The doc suggests that you make a .ts file, but I'm going to make it a .tsx file because in the future we're going to pass in some components, custom components into the Keystatic config. Let's start by exporting default the config function that comes from Keystatic. Keystatic also has incredible TypeScript support, so most of the time you don't even have to check the docs. You can just look at the TypeScript types and you can figure out what you want to do. So first, let's configure what kind of storage we need. So the storage is an object with a property of kind, and they have three kinds. So let's look at the three kinds. First, we have local. This means that it will store files in your local file system and nowhere else. This means that you have to manage pushing your files to GitHub on your own, but it does give you the simplicity of just storing things locally and not thinking about it. The second option which they have is GitHub mode. So in GitHub mode, you can connect your Keystatic to a specific GitHub repository and it will store your Keystatic files in that repository. The one thing that you need to consider if you choose GitHub is that when you first set it up, you will have to create a GitHub app so that Keystatic can talk to the GitHub repository. But it's not very hard and we'll walk through the process. And finally, we have Keystatic's cloud offering. So this is how they plan to make money and fund the project going forward. So if you want to skip the creating of the GitHub app and have it all managed for you, then you can go ahead and use Keystatic Cloud, which is completely free to begin with. But if you want to host images or use any of their premium features, then they do have some paid plans. So let's go with GitHub as our kind. And then we'll set up our repo, which will be, it is repo, which is going to be an object and have an owner who's going to be me, and then name, which is going to be neeshsamsi.com. This is the URL of my repository. So it's going to be https github.com/owner/.com, and if we go and visit this, then this will take us to my GitHub repo with this project on it. After storage, we also have this UI section where we can set up a couple of different looks for the dashboard, the Keystatic dashboard, but we'll get back to this later. Finally, we can get to actually setting up our schema for our different types. So let's focus on our collection for our work. So since we're messing with the data on my website in any case, I'm going to separate my work into client projects, which are these three, and then personal explorations and just personal projects, so that there's a clear distinction between what I'm working on in my free time and what I have had to do for clients, as well as giving these reviews and feedback a little bit more context, because the reviews will only come from clients, whereas my personal projects are not getting any reviews. Keystatic has two concepts in storing data. The first is singletons, and singletons, as you can tell from the name, are single objects of data. So you can think of this as site settings or the content for a specific page, or anything that's going to appear only once. And secondly, we have collections. So collections are when we have one object schema or one type of data, but that type of data is going to repeat multiple times. So you can think of this as blog posts or workshops or case studies, any of that. So in our case study, in our collections, we're going to create a client work, which is going to be a collection which comes from the Keystatic core. So what I did there was it auto-imported. Make sure that you're importing things. And again, here we have a label, which is going to be client work. And then we have a path. The path is relative to the Keystatic config, which is in the root of your directory, where you want to store this data. So I'm going to go into the source and then go into data. And inside data, I'm going to create a folder called client work. And after our directory, we're going to add a star. So this satisfies this type. Looking at the docs for the path, you can see that adding a trailing slash will make the slug be a folder. And then within that folder, it'll add in an index.yaml or markdoc or whatever. But without adding a trailing slash, it'll just keep the slug.yaml. So that's what we want. But obviously, instead of YAML, we're going to store using MDX files. If we just wanted to store data as YAML or JSON, then we can set the format and set that to JSON or YAML right here. But since we're using MDX, there's a slightly longer way of doing this. So we'll come back to the format, but let's first get rid of these squiggly lines by defining a schema. So for our schema, I'm just going to open up our content layer config so we can copy some of the fields from there, and I'm going to open one of my projects. So we have a title and description. So within our schema, we want to create a title, and the title is going to be a slug field. So I'm just going to look at the documentation. We have fields, title, which is a fields.slug, and fields is again an auto import from the Keystatic core. And we're going to pass in an object with a name, which is also an object, which is going to have label of title. And then we have a slug, which is going to have label of slug and a description. Description. Come on, AI. Yeah. URL and version of the title. Use. Awesome. That works. Let's check out why we have this red line. Alright, so since we're creating a collection, we also need to tell the collection which field we're using as a slug. So let's pass in the slug field, and you're going to get type safety for the fields that we create in our schema. So let's put in this, and now we should get rid of the red lines. Let's continue with our schema. So after the title, we're going to create a description. Description. Can't auto import that. Which is going to be a fields.text. Pass in a label, description, and validation. So let's pass in is required as true. Then we have title and description done. We have image. So let's say image, fields.image. And pass in a label as cover image. And then we can say that we have validation of is true, and we can pass in some more configuration. So we're going to pass in the directory, and the directory is where these images are going to be stored. So we're going to store it in /public /client work /images. or let's just go client work, and then we can set the public path. So the directory is where Keystatic is actually going to store the image. So in this case, it's going to go into our public folder, create a folder called client work, and then go into that. Whereas the public path is what Keystatic is going to give us when we request this image. So on our front end, we cannot put in public because Next.js doesn't know what public is. In fact, Next.js will just serve up anything in the public directory from the root slash. So what I mean is, this public slash client work will just become slash client work. When we request this image, we only want slash client work slash image rather than slash public slash client work slash image, because the public directory gets served up from this root slash. Now that we have the image, let's make the image alt. So this is also going to be a fields.text and have a label of image alt text. Let's add in a description. So this is read out to visually impaired users, or shown as a placeholder when the image cannot. This is important because in this day and age, accessibility is very important, and we should do as much as we can to cater to all kinds of users. So I'm going to have this alt text with also validation of is required true. Yeah. And then we had some tags. So the tags are going to be just text actually. So let's make that a fields.text with a label validation. Yeah. About the comma here, and then we have published and updated ad. So I just noticed that actually I'm missing a couple of things in this particular one. I think in some of the other ones we have, we have all of this. So I'm going to go back to the content layer config because this is accurate. So after tags, we have a CTA text and CTA URL. So let's make the CTA text a fields.text label of working text, validation of is required. So if you're wondering what the CTA text is, it's actually this right here. So every card automatically gets a full project link, but some places need a view prototype, whereas some places need a view live site. So that's what the CTA text is. So I'm going to say secondary CTA text and CTA link, which is going to be a fields.url, and also label, and yeah, that's fine. I'm going to put in validation of is required, and lastly we have published and updated ad. So we'll go updated ad, make it a fields.date, go label of updated ad, the validation of is required true, and finally we can put in a default value for this one of new date. So okay, toString, new date.toString. So the first time you create an entry, you'll already have the current date put in, and then subsequent times that you update it, you can update that if you feel. And the last one that we forgot is published, which I'm going to put right up to the top so that we can easily access it. So this is going to be a fields.checkbox, and this one's going to have a label of published. Come on, no, okay, make me type published, as well as a default value of false, so that the first time we make an entry, it's going to be default as non-published, and then when we want to publish it, we can explicitly check the box. We've made quite a bit of progress. We've installed Keystatic packages and created a Keystatic config file, and even started declaring our schema inside the config file. let's actually bring in the Keystatic Admin UI so that we can see our schema changes in an actual UI, and we can also preview the way we're going to edit everything. Back in the Next.js setup documentation, after our schema, we have setting up the Keystatic Admin UI. So first we are going to go into our source and app and create a Keystatic directory followed by Keystatic static.ts. We're going to copy this. This is a client component, and this component just basically brings in the make page from the Keystatic Next UI and brings in our config from the keystatic.config.ts, and it exports the make page function. So we don't have to build any of the UI ourselves. Keystatic gives us this function and handles the complete UI for us. Finally, we're going to create a layout and export the Keystatic app from that layout file. The small problem that we have is that I already have a layout file in my root, and this handles the layout for my app. So what we can do is we can use Next.js's route groups, which are simple organizational structures. So like their example here, they have a bracket marketing and a bracket shop. Actually, this folder doesn't affect anything. It does not change the routing or the does not come into the URL at any point. It's just purely an organizational change that you can add into the app directory. So in my app, I'm just going to create a file called Keystatic wrapped in brackets, Keystatic. And I'm going to put this Keystatic in here. So let's create this layout.tsx and copy this in. And finally, we need to create this catch-all route that will render a null. So now we should be able to check out the admin UI, right? Well, let's try. So on Keystatic, you can't use localhost 3000. They actually need an IP address. So you can use 127.0.0.1. which is your local IP, followed by localhost 3000, and then Keystatic. So if you visit this page, we're going to be greeted by this abomination. And let's quickly explain what's going on here. So in my root layout, which is right here, I'm actually rendering my styles as well as my font and some other stuff like my navbar and footer. Even though it's inside a directory, this layout is also being applied on this layout. So the Keystatic admin UI is being rendered. However, before the admin UI is rendered, around that, we're already rendering our layout. To get around this, we'll have to create another of these organizational route groups. So in the app, I'm going to create a new folder called bracket main. And I'm going to take everything from this root directory, like the styles, the pages, and even the layout, and I'm going to drag and drop it into this main. So first of all, let's just update imports for everything. So we just moved our root layout into a group. So currently there is no layout in the root of the folder, which means Next.js is not going to work well. So let's create a layout.tsx. And from the one we copied, I'm just going to take all of this and holding Alt on Windows, I'm going to take this, and that should be it. Let's hit Control C, and I'm going to paste it into the main root layout. First of all, I'm going to take out these class names, remove my tracking script, as well as the navbar and the footer, and then remove the theme color and quickly import our type for this. So currently this layout is an absolute bare bones default layout inside our root directory in the app, in the root of the app. And then we have one group for Keystatic with its own layout, and then another group for our app, and that group has our layout. So hopefully now if we refresh, then we should be greeted with the Keystatic UI. And yes, everything is dark and we have a login with GitHub. Now we set up the GitHub app. So when you click on login, the first time that we go to a Keystatic project, it's going to take us to Keystatic/setup. And this is because we currently don't have an env variable file. So Keystatic needs a GitHub app, and the GitHub app gives Keystatic a client ID and a client secret. So even though this app is deployed, I'm going to leave this deployed app URL empty. And this is because I want this GitHub app to be created for my local development. And then when I deploy this, I'm going to create another GitHub app using the deployed site, so that then I can edit my site even if I'm on localhost or if I'm on the deployed URL. So I'm going to leave both these empty since I don't have an organization and I don't really want to put my deployed app URL. I'm going to click on create GitHub app, and it's going to ask you to sign in. Once you're signed in, you'll be taken to creating your GitHub app. So you can name this whatever you want. I'm going to name this Keystatic Neesh Samsi Dev. So this is going to be the development app, and then when I do this again on the deployed URL, I'll have to do this process again, and the next time I'll name it prod. So we'll create this app, and hopefully it redirects us correctly. Yes. So we're going to install GitHub app and choose the repo that we're going to install it into. So I'm going to select only selected ones and go to neeshsamsi.com. Alright, and authorize. That should have worked. However, I think their redirect is currently messed up. Quick note, while editing this, I realized why our redirect did not work. So this flow that we went through, which creates a GitHub app, it actually automatically creates a .env file in your directory. And Next.js needs you to restart the development server if you add a new environment variable file. So between cuts, I actually restarted the server, and that's how I got it working. So this time when we click on login, we should get logged in and see our dashboard. And there it is. Okay. So quick rundown of the dashboard. We have our greeting, and then we have the current branch. So this does support creating new branches and creating pull requests like a regular GitHub user. And then we have our collections and singletons. So when we declare some more schemas, we'll have more of them here. But right now we can click on the plus button, and here we have our title, slug, description, and everything. And all of them have our validation, and our published is by default false, and we have everything working. So far we made a Keystatic config after downloading the Keystatic packages. We declared our schema, and then finally we added the Keystatic Admin UI into our existing Next.js app. That's quite a bit for now. This video is already quite long. But in the next video, I'm going to migrate all my data into these schemas. We're going to create a couple more schemas for the site settings and a couple of other fields, as well as query that data using Keystatic's Reader API, and then finally display it all on the website and completely replace content layer. If you've made it this far, I really appreciate it. Consider hitting that like button and subscribing so that you can be notified when I upload the next part of this. If you have any queries or feedback, make sure to put them down in the comments and I'll be sure to check them out. In the meantime, keep learning, experimenting, have fun, and I'll see you next time.